This episode of the Pedalshift Project is brought to you by Cycle Blaze, a welcoming community of people who love to travel by bicycle. Post your own travel journals, follow other people's journals, or talk about bike travel in the forum. All for free at cycleblaze.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Best of Pedalshift. On this edition this month, we are revisiting Pedalshift Project 058, number 58, originally published podcast, September 2016. And this features an interview with friend of the show, Michael Riscica. And he talks about the highs and lows of bike touring across America. Now, Michael's done this 3 times now. And I think at the time of this was just finishing up his third, if I'm not mistaken. And that was kind of the most recent one that he's done as of this particular broadcast. I know that Michael's always talked about going out again. He's kind of a prolific podcaster now and producer of all sorts of things in the architecture world, which is kind of fun if you're interested in that kind of stuff. If you dig what he has to say about bike touring, I think you'll dig what he has to say about architecture. A little bit of a rebel, which I think I dig about him as well. He did some bike rides in 2005, 2007, and of course, as I mentioned, in 2016. You can check out all of this stuff about bicycle touring at coasttocoastbikeride.com. I got links about everything in the show notes. That, of course, is going to be at pedalshift.net/058. Hey, Michael, thanks for joining us on the Pedalshift Project.
Hey, thanks for having me, Tim. Honor to be here.
I'm thrilled to have you back on my show for once. I mean, I'm glad that we were able to hook up on the Sprocket podcast, but at the end of all of that, we covered a ton of territory with Brock and Aaron, but I feel like there was a ton more stuff that I wanted to talk about just with your experiences with this ride that you just finished this summer and then the other ones that you've done as well. So I just figured, hey, let's have you on.
Totally. Great.
So I want to go back, and of course I encourage people who have not heard your prior interview to go check that out, because I feel like this is sort of supplementary, and they'll get a good bit of flavor about kind of your ride from that interview as well. But I wanted to backtrack, and you started off getting into cross-country bike touring because you were looking to move across the country. And I'm curious, what was sort of the inspiration for that? Or did you come up with that actually in the middle of the ride? What was the story behind all that?
So actually, kind of backing up even farther before I did that, it was around 2001. I was living in Boston and I was traveling back and forth to New York quite a bit. And I had just started bike commuting across Boston to work every day. And one day I started come up with this idea that I was going to ride from Boston to New York. And that was my first bike tour ever. And I ended up taking that ride, but in the process I learned about people cycling across America. And I became obsessed with journals, totally fascinated with this idea of cycling across America. And I took my first cross-country bike tour in 2005 when I was in college. And then the trip that I moved across America was in 2007 after I graduated college. So I took the first trip and it was life-changing. I had more fun than I ever had in my life. And every single day I thought about it and talked about it. And I came back as a different person after that trip. And then as school was starting to get close, I was starting to get close to graduating college. I was planning on doing an Appalachian Trail thru hike. And as I was starting to get that planned and putting that out there into the world, one of my friends said to me, he said, "Hey, if you want to cycle across country again, I would totally go with you." And I said, "All right, let's do it." And then my other friend found out about it, and he said, "If you guys are cycling cross country, I'm going too." So now it was the 3 of us cycling across America after college was over. And then I wrapped up my thesis project. I went to Europe. And I came back and I was just living in New York, and it was kind of a dark time of, in this world of working on my architecture thesis. And I said, you know what? After this bike trip's over this summer, I'm just going to stay on the West Coast. And one of my buddies was down with the idea. The other one had a fantastic job he's been working at. He still works there. And so he actually flew home from Seattle. But me and my one friend, in 2007, we rode from Bar Harbor, Maine all the way to Portland, Oregon. And I decided I've been living here ever since. And I kind of showed up on a bike. I couch surfed and camped, and we camped in like Forest Park for the first couple of weeks we were out here, and just found people. It was all right. It was fine. We were homeless across America. And so being homeless in Portland wasn't as bad as it was.
Well, it's funny. I always say that it's a fine line between bike touring and homelessness in a lot of ways. And I don't say that to be flippant. It's really not that far off. And Forest Park, for those of you who don't know, Portland it's the largest municipal park, I think, in the world. It's certainly in the U.S. And it's this enormous area in the West Hills of Portland. And I've always thought, wow, that's a great place to sort of be hidden if you want to be in Portland. And I know that there's quite a few people who do sort of live full time back in there. Did you ever run into anybody?
We would just show up late at night, set up the tents for a few hours, and we're out in the morning. Kind of the same way we're on the bike tour. No, we never really spent enough time back there, but I do see a lot of people though, and I live close to Forest Park with my dog, and I kind of know where a few people have been living for quite a while, but it's an interesting place.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's heavily wooded, old growth forest. It's a real treasure to have inside Portland, I think. And few people get back there, I think, as much as they should. Everybody's going off to the coast or to Mount Hood or something like that, but they've got this beautiful park inside the boundaries of the city. So
yeah. So
I wanted to ask you. I am a big time reader of your blog, to put it mildly, and it was one of the blogs that I said, hey, everybody, you should follow it for the summer. And one of the things that stood out to me was that there were a couple of instances where you had critics. They were either criticizing your ride or your gear or your style or even how you were writing your blog. And it definitely, I think you would admit, it got under your skin. I mean, you definitely kind of, went flame on for a few posts in there. And as a reader, I felt exactly the same way. I was like, what the hell are these people saying? What's your take on all these sort of backseat bicyclists? Because I feel like they pop up in tours for a lot of people, whether it's somebody you meet on the road or somebody you meet online. What's sort of your take on all these folks?
I don't know. It's funny. I feel like I've had this more with the bike touring community. I mean, I write another blog about architecture, and I've always felt like the bike touring community has always had a handful of, I don't know, I want to say crotchety old men that have no problems with giving you a hard time on the internet and critiquing and criticizing. And I've gotten that more. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what it is, but and it seems to happen on every bike tour. And so for me, what was happening was that and it happened a lot more in the beginning of the trip. And by the end, I almost felt like all these annoying people had disappeared, which was kind of a relief. But in the beginning of the trip, I was just getting tons of emails from people critiquing and criticizing. There was one point where I talked about how I wasn't riding through Kentucky because I had a bad experience there, and every cyclist I talked to has a bad experience there. And how I mentioned how I was going to, I was just joking. I said, adventure cycling should take Kentucky off the trail. And I got a scathing email from a local Kentucky cyclist who saw that. There was a guy on Instagram who was commenting on every single picture I had about how he could do it better. Every time I took a picture of my bike, there was a ton of comments about how I was carrying too much gear and I'm going to break an axle and, whatever. Or it was, you're cycling the wrong way. How are the headwinds? So I don't know. It is what it is. I got used to it you get used to it. There was one day in Missouri when I was just, being bombarded with this stuff. Meanwhile, I'm cycling across America, climbing through mountains, and then blogging and uploading my pictures about it every single day. And, I said, you know what? Like, if you guys are just going to critique and criticize me and tell me how I could be doing this better and tell me that my other bike journals are more interesting than this one, then I'm not going to spend an hour and a half writing about what happened every day. So I could just be enjoying my trip. But I don't know. It's kind of funny. Like, I recently went back and read that blog post where I flipped out and, told everyone I was going to throw my computer off the side of the mountain if it didn't shut up.
It was pretty funny. I mean, as a reader, I have to say. It reminds me, you're sort of like the band that like has put out a bunch of albums and you've got some original fans who are like, oh, I like the old stuff better.
Yeah. It's like, all right. That was like, almost 10 years ago. I'm a different person. So
seriously. Yeah. I feel, it's funny. I was surprised how much static you were getting, but when you put yourself out there, there are people who exist to just shit on other people's stuff. And, maybe they're actually getting out there and doing stuff and maybe they're not, but it always says a lot more about the critic, I think, than the person who's doing it. I mean, you're the one who's putting yourself out there.
No, I know. And to one last thing about that is that, I was getting a lot of like feedback and slack and critique and criticism, but that was really just a small percentage of the people that were emailing me and thanking me for doing this work. But yeah, at the same time, it's still kind of funny.
And it's funny, the criticisms always kind of cut deeper than, like, you could get 100 emails from people saying, I love what you're doing. This is great. Keep it up. But you get that one.
I know.
That one outweighs those 100. It's how we're built psychologically. There's studies on this, believe it or not. My girlfriend's a therapist. Can you tell? I wanted to switch gears a little bit, bike humor, and talk about your dog. It's Molly, right?
Yeah, Molly. Yeah.
And I'm sitting here with Bellstar on my lap right now, which is why I think I got dogs on my mind. Your dog patiently waited for your return, and you could tell in probably a dozen different posts how much you missed her while you were on the ride, whether it was on Instagram or what. I think you would post some pictures of her here and there. Would you ever, or have you ever considered bringing her along on a future ride? Is she the type of dog that you think could do it, or what's your thoughts on that?
I wish I could. And I would always tell people on the road, they would ask, like, what's the hardest part of this trip? Is it the mountains or the plains or I don't know. And so I would always say, actually, the hardest part of this whole bike tour is actually leaving my dog for 3 months. But so when she was a puppy, I got here about a year after I moved to Portland. I had this big fantasy that her and I were going to cycle across America and then go hike the Appalachian Trail together. And I actually bought a dog trailer and I got her used to sitting in it as a puppy, and she never really took to it. And I tried and tried and tried, and then I kind of let go of that idea. She's kind of a high energy dog and she needs to run. And so sitting in the trailer, for 4 to 6 hours a day on a bike tour, I don't think she's just the right dog for it. And so I kind of let go of that idea. There are people that, and she's also a yellow lab as well. She's kind of a big dog. I wish I could. I would totally love to, but, I don't know. She likes to stay home. She has a routine. And so it just wouldn't, it would actually, if I was to try, it would probably be too dangerous and the dog would probably be miserable anyways. That's my dog though. I'm not to say, I met a guy in, Kansas who rode the Pacific coast with his dog for, I think he was out 4 weeks. Yeah, he rode for a month. And, he said him and his dog had the best time together. He said the dog loved it. He said the trip was, for his dog, he said the trip was about 1 week too long. Kind of the last week, the dog was starting to get a little anxious and kind of over it. But he said up until that point, him and his dog had a fantastic time. And so he said he had a little, Shiba Inu, and he pulled his dog in a trailer. And it worked out really well.
I met a guy who was doing a tour, and we're talking like one of those tours with no planned ending kind of a thing, kind of find between homeless and bike touring. But he was doing it with his cat. Yeah. And that was just always, that was the thing that was like, well, if you can do it with a cat, surely I could do it with my dog. And I've got pugs, and they're just like the least suited dogs for bike touring ever, except for this new girl that we got. She might be able to handle it. So I'm thinking about that. So I'm glad that there are, it's too bad that you went through the process and decided it's not good for you and your dog, but like, it makes me feel a little bit better. It's sort of like, that it's okay to realize that your dog can't make it, isn't well suited for it. So
yeah, totally.
I wanted to change up and talk about your work. And you've got a lot of irons in the fire. You and I are sort of similar in that way. Sorry, you can hear all my animals in the background probably. Your work from the road required at least, access to cell phone signals or even internet and stuff like that. And I wanted to get your thoughts on the challenges of working from the road while you're on tour. One piece being, did you find that it took you too much out of the ride, or was it a good way of balancing the ability to be able to still have, stuff relating to income while you were rolling? Did it allow you for longer rides and bigger tours and stuff like that? And did you ever run into any point where you needed a signal, you needed internet, and you didn't have it?
Yeah. So kind of what I was doing was I'm a licensed architect, and about 2 weeks before I left for my trip, a builder. I had said I'm not doing any architecture projects. I had said no to many, many things. And then about 2 weeks before I left, in some ways, almost the perfect residential project came my way. And I said, I'll do this project and I'll work on it now and I'll do as much as I can for the first 2 weeks, and I'll do a little bit while I'm on the road, but ideally this project needs to wait until I get back from the bike trip. And so I ended up doing some drawings for that client and emailed those out. But what was really had me working was I run a coaching program, that helps other young architects prepare for the architecture exam. And I wasn't going to do that either. And at the last minute, I decided, what the hell? I've run that program while I've been traveling. I've been to Mexico and Nicaragua and all over the United States. It's an online video. We meet on video chat face to face. And the people in my program are all traveling. There was one time where I was in Nicaragua, someone was in Paris, someone else was in the Middle East, and we're all having a conversation together. And so after kind of realizing that, I decided that I was going to try to give it a whirl to see if I could pull it off. To do that video, to have that video meeting, I use GoToMeeting because it allows me to use the telephone to call in. And if I can have a Wi-Fi signal for the video and for the screen share, if the Wi-Fi signal is weak, at least the audio is clear. And so that's why I use GoToMeeting. And my attitude was, as long as I could find, at the bare minimum, if I could have a cell phone signal or a telephone line, I could at least do my program. And so I think GoToMeeting really it opened a lot of doors for me with working from the road and running my program. My attitude was every Friday night I would start to get anxious and start looking at my maps and starting to figure out where I'm going to land. That I could find a Wi-Fi signal, any kind of a signal. And so I would always either take a long day on Saturday or a short day and stay in some town. Or on Sunday, I would always try to be in a larger sized town. And so every Sunday night when I ran my program, it was done. But I don't know, it was kind of a working from the road. I was riding with people and staying with their pace while doing my thing was kind of tedious. We're all kind of on our own, but it created a bunch of obstacles for me. But I see myself doing it again, and I was writing blog posts and creating content for my architecture site too, even while I was cycling as well. There was one day cycling through Tennessee where the weather was I just had this nasty storm that was rolling through. So I jumped into McDonald's. I used to joke that McDonald's was my temporary office until I got home, because they have pretty good Wi-Fi there.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And so I jumped into McDonald's and I banged out a couple of blog posts and then, had them up and posted in a few hours. And so I don't know, it was nice to find those opportunities. As I mentioned earlier, I was spending about at least an hour and a half of every day of the bike trip blogging about what's been going on, and just keeping my bike journal maintained, which was in some ways that was the real work I was doing. That was consuming more of me than anything else.
What would you do differently maybe on a subsequent trip regarding the work, or do you think you found your rhythm by not planning too much until maybe a day or two ahead of time and then kind of figuring it all out on the fly? Or what sort of would you do differently about working from the road?
See, for me personally, I was writing such an extensive, detailed blog that it was taking so much time. So kind of the next trip, I think I'm done writing these highly detailed, super thorough journals of the road. I think I'll always journal about my bike tours, but I think I'm just going to pare back how much and how complicated it was, because in retrospect, the systems that I had in place to get each blog post out was just way too complicated. And so I think that would make it easier. One of the things I did too was the computer. I actually bought a brand new computer for this trip. I got something, my IT guy, insisted that I needed a solid state hard drive. With all the bouncing around that was happening on the bike tour. And so I ended up buying a new ThinkPad, right before I left, and the computer worked beautifully. But I've had problems in the past with other computers and hard drives that have just gotten screwed up because there's so much, movement that's taken place throughout the day. I don't know. I think, if I was to do anything differently, I would, try to not commit myself to anything as much as possible before I left for a bike tour.
Yeah, I agree with the solid state gear. I have a MacBook Air that I use, and it's got a solid state drive, and it's actually stood up to a lot of abuse and shaking and whatnot. It's just anything with moving parts. You just kind of, and if you need to rely on it, you need to rely on it. And, it's always a drag. That's why I always have backups. I know you got made a little fun of for carrying a lot of tech with you. And for me, if you're relying on that stuff, you need backups. And, that's, an important part, especially with all the stuff that you were doing. I mean, you were taking a ton of video. You were trying to stay in touch with the architecture group that you were doing. I mean, it's just, that's a lot of gear that you have to rely on. And if any of it fails, you're kind of screwed.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
absolutely.
What's the one thing that friends and family, and we all have this, get consistently wrong about your either this ride or any of your past ride that you always felt you were needing to correct?
Well, I think the basic one is the mileage. I've heard, it was like 3 days after I finished my bike tour this summer, and someone said, Michael Riscica rode his bike 2,000 miles across the country. And I was like, no, it was like 4,300 miles, not 2,000. But,
do not underestimate the length of this country on a bike route.
Yeah. Oh, you know what they do? My friends and family do to me all the time, and I think it's hilarious, is after, I don't know if anyone else has experienced this, but after you finish your first cross-country bike ride, and I was just in Austin, Texas to attend a conference, an architecture conference. And so I say to someone, I'm going to Austin, Texas next week. And they go, oh, are you going to ride your bike there? Or I get that all the time.
That's funny. That's funny. Yeah. Once you become a bike guy, everybody's like, oh, you're totally going to ride your bike there, right? Yeah. I want to kind of, again, switch gears. I'm using this phrase all the time in this interview here. The best advice or assistance that you've ever gotten on any of your tours, and whether that's somebody who you were riding with or somebody you sort of rolled up across, who gave you a hand. What's sort of the best thing that ever happened?
So, yeah, that's a great question. You know what it was a long time ago, years and years ago, when I was first getting into bike touring. I couldn't even tell you where it was. It was in someone else's blog, somewhere on Crazy Guy on a Bike. And I was reading about someone complaining about how they have no one to ride with, and they want to cycle across America, and the opportunity wasn't there for them to go with a group of people. And someone said, stop waiting for someone to take you across America and just do it yourself. When you ride with people, it changes the dynamic of how you experience a bike tour in good ways and in bad ways, but just go by yourself. And so that was kind of the position I was in. There was no precedent of me ever cycling across America. There was no precedent of anyone I knew or my friends or family. And when I announced in 2005 that I was going to bicycle across America, everyone thought I was nuts. And my family, my friends, and everyone said, this is like, all right, whatever. And then as time got closer and they started to realize I was actually doing it, there was a lot of resistance to that. And I'm glad I never let them stop me, because bike touring has really impacted my life in a really positive way. But, if I would have waited for someone to take me along, or for someone else to get interested in it so I could go, it would have never happened. So, I really I think just go by yourself, travel by yourself, and, it's an amazing experience.
Yeah, it's really interesting how often people kind of need outside justification, or almost like a permission slip from someone else, to be that last little piece to get them up and over the hump. So that's sort of what I hope this podcast is, and hopefully your blog, and, inspiring people to say, hey, look, I'm not some superhuman person, and I certainly didn't come up with this, but this is cool, and you all should do it too.
Yeah. And you know what's interesting too, and what I learned on this trip as well, is when you tell people, I've learned this a lot, when you tell people that you're bicycling across America, the first thing they think of is themselves bicycling across America. And that's often an uncomfortable experience. Like if you're talking to some little old lady and you say, I'm bicycling across America, and then she starts to imagine herself cycling across America, people get like anxious and weird and saying, that sounds awful or whatever. And then I always respond like, you don't have to do it. I was built for bicycling across America. That's my thing.
My blog or this dude's podcast.
No, you don't have to bicycle across. I'll bicycle across America, so you don't have to. And you could just read about it.
It is funny, when you think about, I think about that as well. The first instinct or the first line from a lot of people, especially people that don't know you, is you're crazy. And it's just interesting, if anybody else said, oh, what's your passion? Oh, I like to paint, nobody would say, oh, you're crazy. It's interesting. The different, reactions that you get over something that's frankly, it's not the most bizarre thing in the world. Maybe it's not the most common thing, but it is interesting. People put themselves in your position.
Yeah.
I want to turn to gear because everybody who listens to bicycle touring podcasts want to talk about gear at some point. So what's sort of your favorite, the favorite things that you bring along or that you brought along on this trip? And maybe is there something, because we always do this. We always think that we're lean and mean by the third or fourth bike tour we do. Yeah. And then we always end up sending shit home. So what's sort of your favorite stuff and what's the stuff that you ended up shipping home?
Everyone made fun of me for the entire bike trip because I had a 15-foot extension cord. But believe it or not, I
almost did that once, by the way.
That 15-foot extension cord saved the day on 24 times with finding electricity and charging stuff, and not just for me, and like all the other cyclists that I was traveling with were like, "Thanks for bringing the extension cord." But so that's a big one. I'm a huge fan of helmet mirrors or just mirrors in general. I think no matter when you're on these long roads and you're on the bike for 4 to 8 hours a day cycling, you really need to see what's going on behind you. And I used to joke and say, that's not even really a joke. I used to say that the helmet mirror saves my life every single day because you can't constantly be turning around and seeing what's going on behind you. And so I would watch the helmet mirror all day long as I'm cycling. And if I saw a big truck coming, I would just get off the road. I wouldn't even mess with it. But without having a mirror or not knowing that something's coming up behind you is, I think, highly dangerous. And I tell everyone, you got to get a mirror. And I don't know how people ride without them because it really has saved my life on a lot of times. So
I feel the same way. And I think that if you haven't found the right mirror for you, I'm talking to the people listening right now, then I would say try something different because I know, Michael, use the helmet-mounted ones, and I tried that forever, and I could never get it to work. Just my eyes couldn't focus right. I could never make it work. Yeah. And so I ended up trying a handlebar-mounted one, which was maligned by lots of people that I know and trust. They said, it doesn't work real well. Well, it worked really well for me. And just to chime in with what you said, the difference between having that extra information about what's going on behind you and to your left is so critical. You wonder how you ever rode without one. And then whenever I'm on a different bike or I'm borrowing someone's bike or I'm elsewhere and I don't have a mirror and I'm looking down at that spot where I normally have a mirror and there's no one not there, I feel really out of sorts. It's like I'm missing an eye or something. And absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that as a favorite piece of gear. What did you end up shipping home that you thought was going to be important but wasn't?
I shipped my Zoom camera lens home, and then once I got to Yellowstone, I wished I had it. I had a tripod. I didn't carry any camping cooking equipment this time.
Doesn't sound like you missed it.
No, I didn't at all. But a lot of clothes, I shipped my maps home when I was done using them. Nothing too out of the ordinary. I started the trip with a yoga mat, which was really nice to have. I was sleeping I would lay down the yoga mat, put my sleeping pad on top of that. And then I was using it quite a bit. And then I got to a point where I was looking to just kind of lighten up. And so I ended up losing that in Knoxville, Tennessee. But yeah, I don't know, not a whole lot really. I would get rid of things more than, I didn't really, I would leave stuff behind more than I would actually ship stuff home.
Yeah. So. But it sounds like it's sort of like it met your needs for a little while and then it didn't. And then it was time to let go.
Yeah. I was pretty aggressive in the beginning of the trip about getting rid of stuff. And then probably about the end of the trip, it was in Montana. I shipped a big box home of just stuff I had collected that I needed to stop carrying. And, but I was pretty good about not kind of just keeping the minimums.
So you've done the Northern Tier route. That was the first one you did. And now you've done the Trans Am twice. In this version of the Trans Am, you modified the route a little bit, skipping Kentucky. You'd mentioned that. Mm-hmm. Are you thinking of trying the Southern Tier route or maybe kind of rolling your own route? What are you thinking for sort of your next one?
Yeah, I don't know. Part of why I took this trip in the first place this summer was I had rode in 2005 and then again in 2007. And then 2007 hit and I hadn't done anything at all. And I became an adult. I got a job. I stayed employed throughout the recession. I got my license as an architect. And then, I don't know. That 2 years ago, I put it out there. I said, I'm going to cycle cross country in 2016. I ended up quitting my job about a year ago. Partly because of this trip, and I was doing really good with a bunch of my own business and all these other projects I was working on that my day job was starting to get in the way. And so kind of shortly after this trip began, I said, I need to go on a bike tour every summer. It doesn't have to be a cross country trip, but every summer I want to at least take at least a week, at least 2 weeks minimum. I prefer longer trips than shorter trips. And we were talking a little bit about this last time. You do a lot of short trips, which I think is awesome. And that's just, for me, the beginning and ending of these bike trips is so much, work and planning that, I don't know, I've always gotten more interested in going out for longer periods of time in some ways. But I don't know, for the next trip, I would like to ride the Southern Tier. My friends Laura and Sam, who rode with me for the first 400 miles this summer, kicked around the idea of doing that maybe this winter, next winter. And if they do, I will probably ride a piece of that with them. I'm not so quite sure what's up for next summer. It's between three things right now. The Southern Tier is a winter ride. But next summer I'd either do a month on the Pacific Coast, however far I get. I was thinking about riding the Western Express from San Francisco to Pueblo, Colorado. That's like a piece of the Trans Am, it goes from San Francisco to Colorado. A lot of people just ride from Yorktown to San Francisco. It's a shorter route. I love cycling through the heat in the desert. For some reason, I don't know, my body just does really well in the heat. And so I'm kind of interested in doing that. And I've also been kicking around doing a cross-country ride across the Canadian Rockies. I don't know a whole lot about it. But I don't know. I love Canada. I love Canadian people. And so, see what happens.
They are building a Trans-Canada route that is, I think, supposed to be completely car-free by the time of, they've got a round anniversary of their confederation, I think next year. And, I don't know if they're going to be able to do it on time, but if that was the case, that would be a hell of a way to cross Canada, to be able to do it without having to be on any of the roads. That'd be great.
Yeah, that'd be coll. I've ridden across Wisconsin, and that in some ways that was kind of like that. Wisconsin is one of my favorite states for bike touring.
Yeah.
There's such an incredible network of rail trails and tunnels and interesting places along the way.
Outrageously friendly people in my experience too. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you've done 3 cross-country rides spanning over 10 years, more than 10 years. What was that? 11 years. Yeah, we're more than 10 years. What's changed in the last decade or so since you first started riding across country? What are the main differences now?
And this is, actually the big one that popped out to me this summer is with this Trans Am bike race going on now, there's a huge, in some ways, I feel like there's subsets of bicycle tourists now. There's the racers and the people that carry very minimal gear. And in some way, I guess it's like bike packing. They go from hotel to hotel. It's really about as far as you can get in speed and, it's kind of looking at it from more of an exercise point of view. There's nothing wrong with that, but I felt like that didn't exist in the past up until a couple of years ago. And I feel like that crew and that subset of cross-country cyclists in some ways has a backpacker mentality with how they approach the gear and the equipment and how they're going to do it. And so I don't know, that's something that's different, and I think it's a good thing. I think the more people, I think bicycling across America is so amazing. It doesn't matter how you do it or what your attitude is. It's just such an amazing trip. Technology's changed a lot. On my previous bike tours, I would always spend a lot of time reading maps and wondering where the hell I was. And did I miss this turn? I used to stop cars and say, is Route 52 up ahead or did I pass it? And this summer I had a GPS and my iPhone, and I felt like wondering where I was never an issue. Where I was, and I always knew exactly where I was and how much farther I needed to go. And that wasn't always clear to me. And in some ways when I didn't have all the technology and I was just using the maps, it was, I don't know, I was just more confused, and it was kind of a gamble. And
I know there's a lot of people that say that's you and I are missing something when we look at our GPS. We're missing some part of the adventure. But for me, it's sort of like knowing where I'm at just takes away a level of anxiety, and I can really enjoy it more. I'm curious, what do you think?
I agree with you. Yeah, I like knowing if the next town is 10 miles or 20 miles. I don't know, it affects my riding. At the same time, I went through a phase of this bike trip this summer where I would turn off the GPS until I needed it, and I would just look at the maps. And then if I wasn't lost, I would just, because there were times when I was going through Kansas and there's nothing to look at for long stretches of time. It was like I was playing the Are We Almost There Yet game, and it was making the days longer. I guess I was watching the pot boil in some ways.
What's it like riding in the plains? I know that's what you just described. It's sort of like there's a monotony to it. Does that, clearly that isn't enough to stop you from doing it. You've done the Trans Am a couple times, but is that a portion that you just sort of dread, or do you find some joy in sort of those middle of the country states where it's not a lot of visual difference?
My attitude about it's changed across all three rides. The first time I rode the Trans Am, I wanted to get into the mountains as fast as possible, and so I blasted through Kansas, and in some ways as fast as I could. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I also kind of had this attitude let's just get through this. Let's get this over with. And I don't know, it is what it is. Whereas on the northern tier, it's kind of people ask me all the time, what's the big difference between Northern Tier and the Trans Am? On the Northern Tier, the Great Plains are a lot longer and the mountains are a lot shorter. And so I felt like we had spent so much time getting across the prairie and the Great Plains that, and I was with my friends and we had a good time. We met a lot of fun people. And so I felt like I appreciated it a lot more. And then this time around, having done such a long stretch from the Northern Tier, I felt like it was no big deal, and I realized how beautiful it was, and I met great people. The Newton Bike Shop opened up in Newton, Kansas. It's kind of in the center of the Great Plains, and it's a pretty cool spot. It's this really nice bike shop that they essentially it's also a hostel at the same time. They let the cyclists stay in the bike shop. And so when and it's also a museum in some ways to the Trans Am bike race, and just bike touring in general. And so if anyone's ever near Newton, Kansas, definitely stop in there. But, so I got there, and by the time I got there, there were 5 or 6 other cyclists that were already there. And I ended up leapfrogging with all those cyclists pretty much all the way up to Missoula. And so having them and just having people to ride through, it makes getting through the Great Plains a lot easier.
I want to sort of fast forward to sort of where you're sitting right now. You've been off the bike for a few weeks, and I get this question all the time, and I certainly have gone through this myself with some of my longer trips. And that's the transitioning back into reality when you get back. I mean, there's a real difference to being on a long-term bike trip, cross country, down the coast, whatever. And then coming back into the reality. The rhythms are different. How you're dealing with people is different. All of that. What's your experience been with that transition on these 3 rides that you've done? And do you have any tips for making that transition?
Yeah. I feel like, and as silly as this sounds, like all 3 bike trips, I've gotten depressed that it's over.
Yeah. That's really common.
And what happens is you're traveling across America on this bicycle, and just you and your bike are a spectacle, and you're treated in some ways treated like a hero or a king, or the most interesting thing that's happened to these towns when you pass through them. People are super open to you on these rides because you're just traveling on a bicycle, and then just kind of ending that and going back to reality. It's kind of a shocker, and on all trips, it's taken me a while to just kind of digest and figure out what's happening. I don't know. And for me personally, I don't even know if I've officially gotten through it. For the first month I was off the bike, I was having a hard time getting back to work and doing the stuff I need to do to make money, and, just kind of what I'm supposed to be, what I have to be doing to because I don't know what it was. It was just, I was having a hard time just kind of getting back into the groove of things. I ended up going down to an architecture conference in Austin last week, and that kind of reignited me, and I came back feeling like, okay, I'm ready to get to work now. And I just haven't stopped working since 4 days I've been home. But I don't know. It's it's a lot to digest, and it doesn't happen very quickly. From my first bike ride, I thought every single day after that bike ride, I thought about the trip and my experiences and the people that I meet. And I still do that today. I mean, so much happens out there, and it's, but I don't know. I guess my advice is to just take it slow and be patient, and, give yourself space. One of my goals in this bike trip was to figure out what I'm going to work on next. I'm kind of at a point where what do I want to do next? I have a lot of opportunities, but I'm not sure which ones to get through. And I pretty much spent all summer thinking about it, and I never really came to a good conclusion on what I was going to do. And then, I kind of figured it out probably about a week or 2 after the trip was over, just through some journaling and talking to some friends. And so, I don't know. I guess my advice is to just don't be too hard on yourself, and to ease back in pretty slowly, and plan on taking more bike rides. People ask me all the time, they say, is this a bucket list thing? And I don't know. For me personally, I've just had bike touring has played such a big part in just how I relate to people and strangers and situations. I don't know. It's really kind of helped shape who I've grown up to become. And I've also had more fun doing that than anything else. And so for me to go back and decide, you know what, I'm going to do a 3rd cross-country bike ride, and I'm going to ride the trail that I knew has a ton of people on it. They're celebrating their 40th anniversary, and it's just going to be a great summer. And so, I don't know. Bike touring has been great to me.
Yeah, it's a lifestyle thing. It's not a bucket list thing.
Yeah.
It does change you. And I mean, I can tell just from talking to you and getting to know you that it's had the same effect on you as it has on me. So that's very cool. It also sounds like something that I'm gleaning from what you just said about transitioning back is trying to find something that can be inspiring that's off of the bike, that can help you make that transition. It sounds like going to that Austin conference was an important thing. I know you went to WDS shortly after you came back, and that can be an inspiring thing too.
And, I just had another thought about that too, Tim. One of the things that I was struggling with it was that I took this bike tour. It was pretty life-changing this summer. And then I came back, and it was, all right, let's get back to doing the same old thing I was doing before I left. And I was having a hard time doing that and accepting that. And so when I said I figured out ways how things are going to be different, and how my life's going to be different after this bike tour. And I'm going to move to a new apartment. I'm going to try a bunch of new different business ideas. I'm going to pursue a bunch of other endeavors. But I hadn't really figured that out until after the bike trip was over, and I realized that my life needed to be different than it was before the bike trip. So
Michael, where can we learn more about your adventures and your architect stuff and all of the things that you do? Where can we go to learn more?
So I write, my architecture blog is called youngarchitect.com. It's a blog for architecture students, people studying for their architecture exam, and just young professionals and people working in this industry. I've been blogging on Young Architect almost 3 years now. And, it's kind of an interest. I don't know. I started it as something to do after I got my architecture license. I say, let's start an architecture blog. Ironically, it got really popular and it just took off like a rocket and, is now pretty much my full-time gig. So Young Architect's my architecture site. And when I started the bike site, I decided that, I needed to start a whole new social media presence and internet presence. And so I used to blog on crazyguyonabike.com. I ended up, bringing my journals over to my own domain at coast2coastbikeride.com. So coast2coastbikeride.com. My Twitter and my Instagram accounts for the bike stuff is biketouring999.
Cool. We'll link that all up in the show notes so everyone can go check that out. I love the bike touring stuff that you write, Michael. It's fantastic. It's a good read. And actually, I realize now that I've got 2 other cross-country bike ride blogs that I can read now, the 2 older ones that you did. I haven't had a chance to read those yet. And I realized, wait, I can do that. So
yeah, they're all there.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us here on Pedalshift Project. And I'm just so thrilled to have you on the show. And look, of course, now the sirens are in the background ruining us all, but ruining my heartfelt thank you for being on the show. So thank you, Michael, for being on.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you for joining. You can find Pedalshift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedalshift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available. A big thank you to Cycle Blaze for sponsoring this episode of the pod. Go to cycleblaze.com today and find inspiration for your next tour.